If you walked into Madison Square Garden back in the late 70s, you could feel the desperation in the building. The New York Knicks were hunting for a savior, somebody who could bring the magic back to the mecca of basketball. They thought they found exactly that on June 9, 1978. According to Basketball Archives, that was the specific date the Knicks selected a tall, blazing fast guard named Micheal Ray Richardson with the 4th overall pick in the NBA draft. He was supposed to be the chosen one. He came into the league armed with the size, the swagger, and a court vision that left veteran defenders spinning in circles. For a brief, spectacular window, he absolutely delivered on that promise. He played with a fiery rhythm that felt tailor-made for the biggest, loudest market in the world. He was the kind of player who made you sit up in your seat the second the ball touched his hands, combining raw athleticism with an incredibly high basketball IQ. But the roaring applause did not last forever. The story of Micheal Ray Richardson is not just a basketball tragedy. It is the story of a harsh culture war that almost brought the entire league to its knees. Television reports later in his career focused heavily on his public downfall, completely overshadowing how undeniably brilliant he was when he first stepped onto the hardwood. Why did a man with the world in his hands find himself at the center of such a severe personal crisis? By February 25, 1986, the highlight reels were entirely replaced by breaking news bulletins. In television reports that shook the sports world, he became the first active player to receive a permanent, lifetime ban from the league. But long before the commissioner's gavel dropped in the winter of 1986, there was a fleeting, electric moment when the entire league honestly believed Micheal Ray was better than Magic. When folks talk about big point guards who revolutionized the game, Earvin Magic Johnson usually takes up the whole conversation. But real basketball heads who were around for the 1979 to 1980 season remember a totally different reality. Micheal Ray was a 6'5" hurricane on the court, tearing through opposing defenses with an elegance that had seasoned coaches shaking their heads. He was not just running the floor, he was dictating the entire temperature of the game. That sophomore campaign was nothing short of a masterpiece. He possessed a suffocating defensive instinct paired with an offensive radar that seemed to see 2 passes ahead of everyone else. According to official league statistics, he led the entire association that year with 10.1 assists and 3.2 steals per game. He was everywhere at once. One minute he was picking your pocket at half court, and the next he was throwing a no-look pass that brought the New York crowd to its feet. He was playing the game at a frequency most players could not even hear. By the spring of 1980, the press was fully bought in. According to major sports media reports, he had just become the very first player in NBA history to lead the league in both assists and steals in a single season. But with that unprecedented spotlight came an entirely new level of pressure. How does a young man handle being crowned the king of New York before he even truly knows himself? He had the city in the palm of his hand, but the same streets that built his legend were about to introduce a destructive element that would soon cause his historic statistics to completely collapse. New York City at the dawn of the 1980s was a mesmerizing, dangerous place to be young, rich, and famous. The nightlife was legendary, a neon-lit playground that never slept and never asked you to go home. But beneath the velvet ropes and the exclusive VIP rooms, a destructive dependency epidemic was quietly taking root, and it was beginning to infiltrate NBA locker rooms across the country. Micheal Ray, riding high on his newfound superstardom, stepped right into the center of that glittering maze. On the court, his raw talent was so immense that it masked the cracks forming behind the scenes. During the 1981 to 1982 season, he still managed to average an impressive 17.9 points per game, according to Basketball Archives. To the casual fan sitting in the upper deck, he still looked like the franchise cornerstone running the offense. But down in the front office, the panic was quietly setting in. The reliable, sharp-focused floor general was starting to slip away, replaced by a man who was fighting a severe dependency issue that the team desperately wanted to keep hidden. By late 1981, the whispers turned into ringing alarms. Unexcused absences and internal disciplinary fines began piling up behind closed doors, reportedly, according to press coverage from the era. The beat writers started to notice that the story was no longer just about basketball. Why were his moods suddenly so erratic, and who were these new associates lingering around the arena? The Knicks brass realized they were sitting on a ticking time bomb, and their drastic front office decision in the fall of 1982 would finally trigger a blockbuster trade to the West Coast. In the business of professional basketball, loyalty is often just a word people use until the numbers stop making sense. By the autumn of 1982, the New York Knicks were done waiting for Micheal Ray to stabilize. On October 22, 1982, the franchise pulled the trigger on a move that left the city in a state of absolute disbelief. According to team transaction records, they traded their former savior to the Golden State Warriors in a straight-up swap for the scoring machine, Bernard King. On paper, it looked like a standard basketball trade, but in the streets of New York, it felt like an admission of a deeper, darker failure. The public shock was immense because, to the average fan, Micheal Ray was still the heartbeat of the team. But while the fans saw a superstar, the front office saw a liability they could no longer manage. The move was designed to be a fresh start, a way to isolate him from the distractions of the New York nightlife and relocate him to the West Coast. However, being uprooted and sent thousands of miles away only added to his internal turmoil. By November 1982, his on-court performance began to reflect his personal displacement. According to his own account in later interviews, his scoring output dropped significantly as he struggled to find his footing in an unfamiliar locker room without his old support system. Reporters noted at the time that he seemed like a different man in a Warriors jersey, lacking the spark that had made him a household name in the Mecca. The Golden State coaching staff tried to integrate him, but the chemistry was never there. They quickly realized that they hadn't just traded for a talented guard. They had inherited a man in the middle of a spiraling personal crisis. Golden State thought they were stealing a superstar at a discount, but they only waited 3 months to pull the ripcord once they realized exactly what New York had been hiding: the Golden State era of Micheal Ray. Richardson's career is often treated as a footnote, a brief blur of transition that barely lasted a full season. But those few months in California were perhaps the most telling part of his decline. Isolated from his family and the only professional home he had ever known, his destructive dependency issues began to accelerate. He was a man drifting in the Bay Area, and without the familiar structure of the Knicks organization, the guardrails were completely gone. Even in the middle of a personal storm, his natural talent would occasionally scream through the noise. On February 5, 1983, he reminded the league exactly what he was capable of. According to box scores from that night, he posted a massive double-double and recorded 9 steals in a single game against the San Antonio Spurs. It was a vintage performance that looked like a man fighting to keep his career alive. But one great night couldn't erase the growing list of missed practices and erratic behavior that was making the Warriors' front office increasingly nervous. They weren't looking for highlights anymore. They were looking for a way out of his contract. The end came with a suddenness that defined his entire career. On February 6, 1983, just 24 hours after that dominant performance against the Spurs, he was shipped back east to the New Jersey Nets. According to trade documents, he had played exactly 33 games for the Warriors before they decided he was someone else's problem. Moving back to the New York area was supposed to be a homecoming, but placing a struggling star right back into his old hunting ground was a recipe for absolute disaster. While Micheal Ray was bouncing between teams, the NBA was facing an identity crisis of its own. The early 80s were a dark time for the league's public image, with rumors of banned substance use running rampant through nearly every roster. The new commissioner, David Stern, knew that if the league was going to survive and thrive on national television, he had to draw a hard line in the sand. In September 1983, the NBA and the Players Association reached a landmark agreement that changed the rules of the game forever. According to public documents, this was the moment the league adopted a stringent new anti-drug policy. This wasn't just a set of suggestions. It was a weapon designed to clean up the sport. During the 1983 to 1984 season, the league formally instituted a strict 3 strikes rule for substance violations. In television reports from that season, the message was clear: get clean or get out. The league was desperate for a way to prove they were serious, and they needed a high-profile case to show that no one was above the law. Micheal Ray, now back in the New Jersey spotlight, was unknowingly walking straight into the crosshairs of this new regime. The press was writing that year about the new era of professional basketball, one where discipline and image were just as important as points and rebounds. For a player who had spent years operating under a different set of rules, the shift was jarring. He was no longer just fighting his own internal demons. He was now fighting an institution that was looking for a reason to make an example out of someone. The rules of survival in the NBA had just changed overnight, and Micheal Ray was already staring right down the barrel of strike one. By the time the 1983 season was in full swing, the New Jersey Nets realized that the man they had acquired wasn't just battling opposing guards. He was locked in a grueling private war with himself. The league's new policy had removed the luxury of secrecy. In late 1983, after a series of erratic performances and missed team obligations, Micheal Ray entered a drug rehabilitation facility for the first time. According to public records, this was the official beginning of a cycle that would define his final years in the NBA. A cycle of treatment, temporary clarity, and inevitable return to the same environments that triggered his crisis. On the court, the flashes of brilliance were becoming shorter and more infrequent. When he was present, he could still dominate, but the consistency that once made him a candidate for the next Magic had evaporated. Fans in New Jersey were left wondering which version of Micheal Ray would show up on any given night, or if he would show up at all. In 1984, the situation reached a boiling point when he mysteriously disappeared from the Nets training camp. The story became a tabloid fixture, with some reports claiming that even his closest teammates had no idea where he was for days at a time. Reporters noted at the time that the Nets organization was at its wits' end, caught between the desire to protect a valuable asset and the need to maintain team discipline. This was a man who seemed to be crying out for help, yet the professional world around him was governed by win-loss columns and contract obligations. Every time the public completely wrote him off, his sheer, undeniable talent dragged him back onto the court, leading to one of the most unbelievable false dawn seasons in NBA history. There is a specific kind of hope that only sports can provide, the belief that a fallen star can find redemption through the game they love. During the 1984 to 1985 season, it looked like Micheal Ray Richardson was writing the greatest comeback story the league had ever seen. He appeared focused, lean, and more determined than he had been since his early days in New York. According to historical player statistics, he averaged a career-high 20.1 points per game and reclaimed his throne as the league leader in steals with 2.9 per contest. He wasn't just back, he was better than ever. The narrative in the media shifted from tragedy to triumph almost overnight. He was the poster child for the league's new rehabilitation efforts, a living example that the 3 strikes policy could actually save a career. In the spring of 1985, The league solidified this redemption arc when he was voted the NBA Comeback Player of the Year. In a press conference transcript from that ceremony, he spoke about his gratitude and his focus on the future, sounding like a man who had finally put his demons to bed for good. But for those who knew the nature of his struggle, the award felt like a fragile shield. While the basketball world celebrated his return to form, the underlying pressures of fame and the accessibility of his vices remained unchanged. The comeback was real on the scoreboard, but the internal healing was far from complete. He was smiling for the cameras, holding a trophy that told the world he was healed, but behind closed doors, the demons were already taking the wheel again. The high of the 1985 season didn't last long once the 1985 to 1986 campaign tipped off. The grueling schedule of the NBA, the constant travel, and the weight of being the league's success story began to take their toll. The shadow of the league's policy loomed larger than ever. In late 1985, the progress he had made came to a crashing halt when he failed a league-mandated drug test. According to major sports media reports, this registered his official second strike under the collective bargaining agreement. The atmosphere around the New Jersey Nets shifted from celebration to somber realization. The front office was now in a defensive position, knowing that their star was just one mistake away from a permanent exit. In the winter of 1985, he was forced back into a mandatory treatment program, which resulted in him missing critical regular season games. The press coverage began to sour, with columnists questioning if the league's investment in his recovery was worth the repeated disruptions to the team's chemistry. Basketball archives show that even when he returned to the lineup, the joy had left his game. He was playing with a metaphorical sword over his head, knowing that every time he walked into the facility, he could be asked for a sample that would end his career. The league office had drawn a very clear line in the sand, and an ambitious new commissioner knew he was going to have to make an example out of somebody. The early months of 1986 felt like a long, slow walk toward an inevitable cliff. Micheal Ray was back on the court for the New Jersey Nets, but the atmosphere was suffocating. Every time he stepped into the arena, he was operating under a microscope that no other player in the league had to endure. He was playing high-level basketball, but the joy was gone, replaced by the crushing weight of the league's zero-tolerance policy. According to official league statistics, he managed to suit up for 47 games during that 1985 to 1986 season, showing glimpses of the defensive brilliance that had once made him a superstar. Reporters noted at the time that the locker room felt tense, as if his teammates were holding their breath every time a league official walked through the door. The pressure of maintaining a perfect image while battling a deep-seated personal crisis was reaching a breaking point. In February 1986, the nightmare scenario finally became a reality. According to public documents, Micheal Ray tested positive for a banned substance for the third time. He had officially run out of chances. In the blink of an eye, the story stopped being about points and assists and became a legal and professional execution. Television coverage at the time focused on the grim reality of the situation. One of the most talented guards in the world had just triggered the ultimate penalty in the NBA's new rule book. The test results landed on the desk of David Stern, a man who was determined to prove that the league's survival was more important than any single player's career. The commissioner was finished with rehabilitation and second chances. He was ready to deliver a historic decision that would change the sport of basketball forever. The hammer finally fell on February 25th, 1986. In a moment that remains one of the darkest days in the history of the sport, Commissioner David Stern held a press conference that sent shockwaves through every locker room in the country. In a formal press conference transcript from that day, the league announced that Micheal Ray Richardson was being handed a permanent lifetime ban from the NBA. He wasn't just suspended, he was erased from the league. He became the first active player of his caliber to be cast out. a move intended to serve as a terrifying warning to every other player in the association. The fallout was immediate and cold. On February 26, 1986, just one day after the announcement, he was officially stripped of the remainder of his lucrative contract with the New Jersey Nets. According to major sports media reports, millions of dollars in future earnings vanished in an afternoon. The brotherhood of the NBA, which had been his entire world since he was a young man, was suddenly closed to him. His locker was cleared out, his jersey was effectively retired in shame, and his name became synonymous with the dangers of the era. In interviews later in his life, he described the feeling as being told he had died while he was still standing there. The league had moved on, scrubbing his image from the promotional materials and focusing on a new, cleaner era of stars. But for Micheal Ray, the game didn't just stop. He was a 30-year-old man who had been stripped of his salary, his uniform, and his identity, and he was suddenly staring at a mountain of evaporating wealth and a reputation that felt beyond repair. When the NBA doors slammed shut, the silence was deafening. For a man who had spent his life hearing the roar of 20,000 fans in Madison Square Garden, the sudden lack of an audience was a psychological blow as heavy as the financial one. By late 1986, the reality of his situation set in. He still needed to play, and he still needed to earn a living. According to press coverage from that winter, he was forced to trade the glitz of the NBA for the gritty, unglamorous gems of the Continental Basketball Association and the United States Basketball League. The press followed him to these minor league stops, but the tone had changed from admiration to pity. Reporters noted at the time that seeing a former All-Star playing for a fraction of his old salary in front of a few hundred people was a sobering sight. The financial instability was becoming a crisis of its own. In 1987, as some reports claimed, he was struggling to manage the debts and lifestyle costs that had piled up during his time at the top. The man who was once the new magic was now just another cautionary tale, a ghost haunting the fringes of professional basketball. Despite the public humiliation, he never lost the ability to dominate on the hardwood. Even in the minor leagues, his talent remained far above the competition, but no NBA team would dare touch him while the lifetime ban remained in place. He was stuck in a professional purgatory, appearing to have reached the tragic, entirely predictable end of a fallen star. That was the reality until a completely unexpected phone call from across the Atlantic offered him a second life in a place where his past didn't carry the same weight. By the late 80s, the American sports media had largely closed the book on Micheal Ray Richardson, shelving him away as a tragic warning. But 3,000 miles away, in the ancient streets of Bologna, Italy, a completely different story was being written. The European game in that era was becoming a landing spot for high-level American talent, and for Micheal Ray, it was the sanctuary he didn't know he needed. Far away from the relentless scrutiny of the New York tabloids and the rigid judgment of the league office, he found a place where he could just be a ball player again. He didn't just participate in the European leagues, he dominated them with a ferocity that proved his elite skills hadn't aged a day. According to Basketball Archives, during the 1988 to 1989 season, he led Virtus Bologna to incredible heights, winning multiple domestic and continental titles. He was playing with a sense of freedom and joy that had been missing since his early days at the Garden. While his peers back home were winding down their careers, Micheal Ray was being treated like royalty in Italy, proving to the world that his talent was far greater than the crisis that had interrupted it. Then came the moment everyone expected, but no one was sure would happen. In 1988, the NBA officially reinstated him, granting him the legal right to return to the league and reclaim his place among the best in the world. According to public documents, the path was cleared for his homecoming. But in a move that stunned the American basketball establishment, he chose to stay in Europe. He had found his peace and his pride in a different culture, leaving the American basketball public with nothing but the ultimate what-if story. When you look back at the history of the game, there is a tendency to define players by their lowest moments. But the numbers Micheal Ray Richardson left behind tell a story of undeniable greatness. If you strip away the headlines and the bans, you are left with a statistical profile that rivals some of the greatest to ever play the position. According to official league statistics, between 1978 and 1986, he finished his NBA career averaging 14.8 points and 7 assists over 556 games. Those aren't just solid numbers. They are the marks of a generational floor general. The true weight of his impact is seen in the categories that define the defensive side of the ball. According to Basketball Archives, even in the present day, he still ranks among the highest all-time in career steals per game, sitting at a remarkable 2.6. He was a defensive specialist who could run an offense with the best of them, a prototype for the modern multi-positional guard. When you compare his peak seasons to established Hall of Famers, the similarities are striking, leaving many to wonder where his jersey would be hanging today if the era had been a little more forgiving. Ultimately, Micheal Ray Richardson's legacy is more than just a collection of box scores. He was the catalyst that forced the